Hello, America, and to our friends around the world, greetings. Welcome back. This is a bit of a departure as I've been experimenting with AI videos and incorporated with an overlay on the chickens development with some shots of the cats. This is something that's been on my mind for a little while. A little background, I do everything I can to keep myself away from commercials. I don't like monopolies. I think, though, the war on monopolies has failed because of all the video streaming platforms dramatically escalating their prices. Physical media is where it's at because it doesn't get delisted, deplatformed, altered, edited, whatever, censored. So I take my physical media, put it on my hard drive, plug it into VLC, push the loop all and random. So I have no idea what I'm going to watch. It just plays through when I'm in the mood for something recreational. At one point, both Star Trek 3 and Search for Spock and Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, have been in the queue and have played through. And it got me thinking. There's a line that's uttered in Star Trek 3 that years ahead of its time seems to predict this very event of the Excelsior witnessing the decimation of the mining moon of Praxis, which was for the Klingons their chief energy production facility. Now, if you dig a little deeper into the lore, you will find other references, even going back to the original series, where John Colicos, infamous for his role of Baltor in Battlestar Galactica, who was a Klingon commander who had overrun the planet Organia, the one where the old men turn into energy beings. And he makes a comment about needing to have conquest in order to keep their supplies, you know, you know, at the right level. And then there's other references, whether it's Michael Ansara, yeah, another one, Michael Ansara, who was Kane, in Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. So, or Kane on Star Trek, but he was also, I think that was his name too, also in Buck Rogers was Kane. I could be mistaken, but it doesn't matter. It's just it's amusing that these guys, both John Colicos and Michael Ansara, did did stints on all these other sci-fi dealy whoppers, and then William Campbell was both the Squire of Gothos and the other Klingon, the one on the space station with the tribbles, right? Anyway, here we have the Excelsior with Praxis having exploded, and soon after that we have the introduction of Captain Spock giving a presentation at Starfleet headquarters. And within this presentation that Spock is delivering to the brass at headquarters, he reveals that the Klingon Empire has less than 50 years of life, and that he wants to spearhead an olive branch, a peace offering, and he commits Captain Kirk and the Enterprise to be the pointy end of that peace offering. And even the brass say, "Yep, that's a good idea," because anybody will think twice about going up against you guys because you've got plot armor. So Kirk, being upset, calls Spock out on it after the meeting has adjourned, and Spock says to him, "But the Vulcan ambassador Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know who your dad is. You know, knock it off. You're being you're being technical for no reason. I don't want to do this. Now you've cornered me into doing this. I don't like it. But that's a whole separate aspect. It's the fact that Spock and his father, the Vulcan ambassador, both went to the Klingon Empire and began the peace negotiations. But with everything that we've seen in our own world, take, for example, if you haven't followed it, I'm sure that you can find other sources that will bring you up to speed on it. These various legislative acts, these overwhelming omnibus packages or uh, authoritarian uh, rights depriving legislation. The Patriot Act is a common example. And just overnight, this big package that curtails all of your civil liberties was introduced to Congress right after 2001's nefarious September activities. So, in a similar manner, how long did the Vulcans know that the Klingon Empire was bound to fail? I suggest that the Klingon Empire was actually being proactive, aggressively proactive in their efforts to to counter this collapse. They were well aware of this collapse, at least to the events of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when the Genesis device was activated. At the beginning of Star Trek III, you have the Klingon spy Valkyris having somehow gotten a hold of the Genesis data that had been repackaged, repurposed with then Admiral Kirk, who was the Genesis commander or liaison or whatever you want to call him, providing the presentation. Now, of course, that's because they didn't want to pay the lady for her screen time again and again and again. At least that's what I figure it is. But the repackaged information with him delivering all of the details about its progress of being tested in a cavern or in a lab in a cavern and then on a moon or other lifeless dead body. The point being is the Klingons saw this as not only an opportunity to offset their impending collapse from overspending on a military budget. Huh, again, more parallels to current society, or at least the last 70 years. All right, so you got the Klingon spy getting the data, and then you know transmitting it to Christopher Lloyd, who is the Klingon commander. I I grew up watching this, and be honest with you, when I was a kid, I watched it. I was underwhelmed. It hasn't been until becoming an adult and understanding there were certain nuances. Among those nuances was learning whether or not there was an actual script that incorporated this, or it was production notes, or it was suggestions. I'm not certain. But the rumor mill being along the lines of number one, Kruge was supposed to steal a Romulan bird of prey in order to do this act. Number two, Vulcans were going to secede from the Federation both because of Spock's death and because of the, the apocalyptic level of destruction that the Genesis device represented. Because if you remember in Star Trek II, Dr. McCoy asks what would happen if this was used on a planet that already had life. Spock responded with something along the lines of it would destroy the existing life in favor of the new matrix. The Klingons recognize, or would have recognized soon, that the Genesis device offered both a bargaining chip to keep everybody at bay or to do their bidding, and as a means of offsetting their collapsing economy. There's references, as I said earlier, about John Colicos, his core character. When they go to Organia, there's a line, something along the lines of them needing to do conquest in order to keep their economy going. I don't recall if Michael Ansara's character said anything similar, because that one was a bit bizarre. You know, the Klingon ship blowing up at the beginning and then transporting them all up, and then, you know, then they all get swords and fight throughout the ship instead of, and then they start laughing at the little thing at the end. Anyway, the point being is that the Vulcans were aware that the Klingon Empire was going to end, and it plays into the idea of secession off the from what I've heard as the rumors. The other rumor being that he was going to steal a Romulan ship, which plays into the concept that if you're going to do an act of espionage, you're going to want to misdirect as to who is actually performing the espionage. So why not take an adversary's equipment, use it, that idea. So I don't know. But for that to happen, there's a high level that it would represent. It is state sanctioned on some level, even if only a few knew about it. And the leadership of the empire may not have known about it. Only certain members may have known about it, but it was. I fully suspect that if this were a real world thing, this was a state sanctioned act. They became aware of it, of an opportunity to postpone their demise. They tapped this individual with a mission to obtain another nation's equipment, one that was uniquely tailored and designed, meaning the cloaking device, to be able to go back and forth across the different borders, whether it was between the Romulans and Klingons or the Klingons and the Federation. It didn't matter. They could do it with the cloaking device without being monitored. They would be able to obtain the data and bring it back, but then it became, once the data had been obtained, Kruge discovers Valkyris had already viewed it. She's not in the line, in the chain of command of who's supposed to know. She was supposed to obtain the data. She was not supposed to view it. Those are big, big points that most people, I would imagine, overlook. But when it comes to certain operations, there are certain rules of engagement that are to be followed. And one of them is, unless you have orders to look at it, you don't look at it. She looked at it. Therefore, the commercial vessel that she chartered went bye-bye. Then he decides to act on his own, to go to the planet and view it for himself.
We are going to this planet, even as our emissaries negotiate for peace with the Federation. We will act for the preservation of our race. We will seize the secret of this weapon, the secret of ultimate power.
And they've been portrayed as a combative, warlike species. Um, Going back to John Colicos, Michael Ansara, there's been a few other examples. The one where they're on the planet where was it Friday's Child, right? Where only McCoy could touch the pregnant lady, and they'd never invented bows and arrows, and so it was a bit of a unique thing for them. So that Klingon commander, he was a bit different, as well as the William Campbell commander that was on that the space station with the tribbles. But Michael Ansara's and John Colicos's Klingon commanders were more belligerent, more aggressive, more hostile, keeping in line with the future interpretations of them being a warlike species. Feudal would probably be a more apt description. Think of medieval Europe with the feudal lords and the courts and serfs tied to the land and knights going out and doing what they felt was honorable, but was in our present state of mind looked at as barbaric or destructive. Not all the time, but you know. So you've got the first opportunity they've got. What do? They shoehorn themselves into it. They came to the Federation, to Earth, to say, give us Admiral Kirk. He did a bad thing. They never discuss their economic woes, which prompted the Espionage Act to begin with. They don't even disavow, or at least not directly, they don't seem to disavow the actions taken by the Klingon crew that led to all of the events of their demise. They're there just strictly as a distraction. Look over here and look at us, you know, throwing confetti at this direction. Pay no attention to the paint splatter that ruined the set over on this side. It was, and even after the introduction, it wasn't until after the Vulcan ambassador Sarek, Spock's dad, walks in and starts directly challenging the Klingon ambassador. It was your people who did this action, which cost the lives and the ship and all hands being lost of the Grissom. It was your people which ended Kirk's son. It was your people who crossed the border. Doesn't address the cargo ship, commercial ship that had been chartered, but all these other points were swept under the rug because they wanted a full distraction from the idea, from it being a state sanctioned espionage act. Just as Sherlock Holmes said in, what was it? Was it The Hound of the Baskervilles? You know, in what of the barking dog, of which the response was, there was no barking dog. Exactly. What isn't being said is just as important as what's being said. And it doesn't matter if it's intentional in a movie or if it is in real life. How things are said, what things aren't being said, are just as important as the actions and words that have been taken and spoken. And it is my opinion, whether it was intentional or not, and I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't intentional. It was just accidental. that they accidentally created a subplot that the Klingon Empire was fully aware of their own demise rapidly approaching, the Vulcans being the analytical group of thinkers that they were stereotyped as, were well aware that the Klingon Empire was not sustainable and that they would start taking more aggressive actions in order to postpone the inevitable fall. When Genesis was demonstrated and successfully tested, they saw that as an opportunity to seize both an opportunity to expand their own empire's resources by converting dead bodies, asteroids, moons, already exhausted, planets, that had been overfarmed, overmined, maybe even overdeveloped and had just fallen into ruin. They saw this as an opportunity to reset and start again, and to use it as a weapon of terror to cause others to bend the knee to their will. So, if that was the overarching theme that Harve Bennett and the rest had, Nicholas Meyer, Harve Bennett, Leonard Nimoy had originally crafted and, behind the scenes, thumbs up to them because that was pretty monumental. If it wasn't, yeah, I don't know. It was just something I got to thinking about and I was fascinated. Let me know what your thoughts and opinions are. Were you originally underwhelmed when you saw it in the movie theater in the 80s? Do you still have your Burger King commemorative glass with Kirk and company looking up at the destroyed Enterprise? Thanks for entertaining my midnight musing. Have a great day.